Hey folks, I wanted to try a different style of tutorial today, and that I actually want to talk about programming. So I'm going to show you a little thing in Codea, which is a great app for the iPad. What we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to implement pinch zoom. So without further ado, let's get started. So what I'm going to do, if you have Codea, awesome, open it up. And then we're going to use error code to do this. So let me open up error code. Error code is cool because it lets you connect to Codea via the browser. So we're going to scroll down to our multi-touch example. Okay, so here we can see our code. Here's the actual interface. So just to test this out, basically what happens is you touch the screen. When you touch the screen, it logs it, and then for every touch that gets stored in this table right here, it's going to create an ellipse. Or first, it's gonna generate a random color, and then it's gonna pull that touch out of the table that it was stored in, and then it's gonna create a circle or an ellipse with the same width and height at the location of that touch. So just to show it, I'm gonna touch one finger on the screen. Here's 2 fingers. Here's 4. Right, you can kind of do this and whatnot. So what we're gonna do is we're going to make it so that we can pinch and zoom. So let's start. First, let's get a little background image in there. So I have notes on the other screen. So all this is going to use the built-in assets that come with Codea. So keep that in mind. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to add a background image. So sprite mode center, because we want where we specify the coordinates for the sprite, we're specifying the center of the sprite. Okay. Now I'm going to use this sprite space cute background. And I will show you that in just a moment. But so the first thing I need to do is get the width and height. So, well, actually, before I do that, let me just get it on the screen. So sprite space cute, and then that's the name of the directory within Codea, and then here's the actual asset background. All right, then we need to put in our XY position, and then the size of this. So we will do the size of the screen, the width of the screen, and the height of the screen cut in half. So that way it's positioned in the center. Remember, this is our X and this is our Y. And now we are gonna do let's just do 300 and 300 for our width and our height. Okay, so we got it on screen. So let's actually figure out the width and height of this sprite. So we do W, H. These are our 2 variables, and we're going to store the sprite size of this variable. Space cute background. Whoop, make sure we spell it right. Okay, and now we can put W, H. Okay, so it's nice and full screen. That's awesome. Okay, cool. So it's a little bit big, so let's cut that in half. 0.05. Okay. Times 0.5. All right, so we just cut. Again, this is the X's and the Y. I'll add some comments. Okay, so this to add comments, you do two dashes like that, and then whatever you write after it will be a comment. So this is our where on the X-axis. This is our where on the Y-axis, and you got to remember that the lower left-hand corner is the 0, 0 mark. Okay, this is how big on the X-axis, how big on the Y-axis. So now, because this is drawn before we draw these touches, the touches appear on top of it. Just for the sake of clarification, if I put this code after these guys are drawn, when I do my touches, they are behind. So draw order is important. that's something to keep in mind with Codea. Okay, so we'll put that back. All right, so we've got our picture. Now what we want to do for debugging purposes, I want to know, well, let me see. So the best way to start this is to just say, in order to do pinching and zooming, we need 2 touches. Okay, if we have 3, it's not going to count. So how do we keep track of that? Well, we've got this table right here, which is storing all of our touches. So every time a touch is added, it gets stored with this particular ID, which means that this, if I add a print ID, comma, touch.id, like that, every time I touch the screen, you'll see there's it's a different number, like that. Okay, so it's hard to keep track of them in this table. You'll know that Codea, if you assign something a particular number in the language Lua, it's going to, the table will not be consecutive, meaning you're not going to have touches index 1, touches index 2, touches index 3. You're going to have touches index 3586908116, and then whatever else we had. We had 377, 34, 352, etc., etc. So let's get rid of that. So what we want to do is store the 2 touches. So we will go, let's just create some variables. So store the 2 touches. So this is A, and we're going to set it to nil. Now we've got B. We're also going to set that to nil. So these are our 2 touches. Now we need to store the position of these 2 touches. So AV equals a vector 0, 0. Okay, we'll do the same thing. B vector equals vec2 0, 0. All right. Okay, so now we can, when we're inside this touch, what we have to do is after we've stored it, we need to figure out how many touches there are. So let's write a little function that stores it. So we're going to count the number of touches that are there. So function count touches, okay, end. Now we need our starting counter, I equals 0, whoops, 0, for k comma touches in pairs, k comma touch in the table touches, do the following. Let's just close it off, just so we don't get lost. There we go. Make sure it's all indented properly. Okay, so for every touch that is inside this table, and you got to remember that every time we touch the screen, something gets stored here. So we want to, every time we do that, we want to increment I equals I plus 1. Okay, and then after we're done, we return I. So to show that, we can go print count quote num touches comma count touches. Okay, so let's check that out. Sorry, I keep forgetting I gotta scroll on the iPad, not on the screen. Okay, so if I touch the screen, touches 1, touches 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, touches 0. Okay, cool. All right, so that is working great. All right, so now what we need to do, now that we've counted them, let's see, that was just for debugging. So we can kind of cancel that out. Just because, we're just making sure that we have the ability to count touches. So what we want to do is we want to only do some stuff if there are only 2 touches. So if count touches equals 2, then end. So let's add just a thing just to see if this code is going to happen. So print only 2 touches. Okay, cool. Let's check it out. So 1, nothing's happening. Only 2 touches. Okay, great. And if I move my finger, it's doing that. If I do 3, it's not doing that. Okay, cool. So that works great. So we'll get rid of this line of code because we don't need it. It's just to show that we're actually getting into that logic. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to gather these 2 touches. So the best way to do that is to look through this touches table and grab the two. So let's gather them. So function gather touches end. Okay, and now we need to go. These are our stored touches. These are the ones we're going to grab from the touches table because we're not sure what order they're going to be in. Again, remember I said earlier how when something gets stored into this table, it's going to have a big. It's based on this identification number, so they're not going to be consecutive in the table. So we need to make them consecutive. So for k comma t in pairs touches. So we're grabbing each touch that's stored in that table. Do the following. We are going to table.insert into table A, insert that individual touch. So now they are consecutive. And then we want to get the 2 touches back. You remember we created, this is the first touch, second touch, whoops. First touch, touches vector. Touches vector. Okay. Coming back down here. So we want to get these 2 touches into a usable set of data. So we've stored them into A. We've gathered them so they are sequential. So now we can go return A1 and A2. If you know anything about Lua, you know that tables are not indexed from 0 like most languages. They're indexed from 1. So this is the first item that was inserted. This is the second item inserted. And if you remember that we only do this when we have 2 touches. So we need to go A comma B equals gather touches. Okay, now we've got our 2 touches. Now just to check it, let's do print A comma B. And you'll see that each touch is a table. So we're going to see that data. Okay, so now if I press, you'll see, there we go. We have our 2 touches, and then it updates it. It's a little bit slow because it's, I'm screencasting from the iPad to the computer. So let's get rid of that data. But we know, because we're seeing that the 2 touches are there working, we have this ID 4070096. And 4070960, that's the second one. You can see that it did gather the 2 correctly. So we need to get the vectors for these 2. So AV equals vec2 a.x, a.y. Okay, and BV equals vec2 b.x, b.y. Okay, and then finally we need the distance. So we've got the coordinate of each touch now, but we need the distance between them. So distance equals AV distance BV. Okay. So, all right. So now that we've got this distance, what can we do? We can calculate. We can display this distance. So we'll do print distance. Quote distance. Okay, let's see what that gives us. So if I push 2, close them together, see, we can figure out that distance. So what we need to figure out is if this distance is shrinking or expanding. So the best way to do that, and the other thing we have to do is we have to reset these variables when we're done lifting up our fingers. So we need to keep track of if we're doing a 2-finger touch or not. Okay, let me see. I'm looking at my example code. So, okay, the way this logic is gonna work is if we have 1 finger down and then we push a second finger down, that is the state touches.begin. So if touch.state equals began, then, all And this is my personal preference from other languages to put it in parentheses. Update this formatting a little bit. Okay, so if touches.state began, we're going to do some stuff. If it's else, if touch.state equals moving, then we're going to do some other stuff. So basically, when we first touch the screen with 2 fingers, we need to say that 2 fingers have touched the screen. So we need to go, let's create a variable that's called 2-finger touch. 2-finger touch, and we'll set it to false. And then, so when this begins, 2-finger touch equals true. It's just a habit for me to add semicolons from other languages. Okay, now we need to keep track of when touch.state ends. So what we're going to do is if 2-finger touch equals true, this means that we lifted off a finger. So we need to say that it's false. 2-finger touch equals false. Now, what can we do if 2-finger touch is true? So what we need to figure out if, wait, is that right? Yeah, that is right. Okay. So what we need to do now is if 2-finger touch is true, that means we just started it, so we need to document, we need to keep track of this first distance. So let's create a variable for that. So initial distance equals 0. Okay. So now we can keep track of that. So initial distance equals dist. Okay. So what this means is that we can figure out if our touch has gone bigger or if it has gone smaller. Oh, and here's where the other part goes. If count touches equals 2, then do this, else, whoops. Why is that going there? I shouldn't be doing that. Okay. So if count touches equals 2, we are going to, we're going to do a bunch of code and whatnot. If it does not equal 2, then we need to reset everything to the default state. So A, comma, B, A equals nil, B equals nil, initial distance equals 0, and then 2-finger touch equals false. Just to be safe. Okay, so now what we need to do, if touch.state equals moving, we need to keep track. We need to figure out like how much it's moved. And I wanted to limit it. I wanted to limit it so we can only zoom in like half size or twice the size. So basically, I wanted to put limits on how much we can zoom in or whatnot. So let's add a variable that stores how much we've zoomed in. So ratio equals 1. And we can, just to demonstrate how this works, we can do this times ratio. So this way when we touch the screen, the position between the 2 touches will be affected by this, just to show what's going on. So if touch.state equals moving, we can figure out our ratio equals this current distance and then over our initial distance. So basically when we touch the screen twice, we're going to measure the distance between the 2 things. We're going to use this distance. If it's the first time we've touched the screen with 2 fingers and they're not moving, we're just going to store what is this initial distance. And if our fingers are actually moving, meaning that we've already done a 2-finger touch, then we're going to compare this current distance to the first distance of when we put 2 fingers on the screen. So let's see if this does it. So I'm going to touch the screen twice. Oh, there was an error. What was that error? That's set to 1. That is set to 1. Let's see. Let's make sure ratio equals 1. Oh, I need to make sure that initial distance is not 0. So the best way to do that is to say if distance, if initial distance does not equal 0, and also if we don't actually need to change that, so we'll do if initial distance does not equal 0, and then later I'm going to add another check just to make sure that initial, like, don't modify ratio if don't modify the ratio if initial distance and distance are the same thing. Just it'll be fine the way it is. So let's redo this. Okay, it's recompiled. Now if I touch the screen twice and I squeeze, we can see that the balls change size. So that's awesome. That means it's working. So what we want to do now is we want to limit the amount of touch that can be done. So let's add a new function that's going to give us the ability to measure, to see if a value is between two values. So between, here's our value, this is our low, and this is our high. So let's go in. So we want to know if low is less than or equal than the value, and if value is less than or equal to the high value. We want to know if this value is in between low and high. Okay. So basically, now that we can check for that, what we want to do is say if the touch state is moving, initial distance is 0, then let's make sure that the distance is within a certain value. So if between, basically I want to be able to shrink, I want to set the ratio so we can scale between half of our current size and twice our current size. So to do that, we need to make sure that distance is, using this between function, we want to make sure that our low value is half of our initial, like don't go smaller than our initial distance, cut in half. And don't go bigger than our double, twice our size. So initial distance times 2. Then so this is how this works. So we calculate our distance between the two touches. If it's the first time we've touched our fingers to the screen, we store this initial distance because we are going to compare against it once the fingers start moving. When the fingers start moving, if the distance between the two fingers is in between half of the initial distance and twice the initial distance, then we can figure out our ratio. What this is going to do is it's going to keep, I'll do print ratio, quote ratio, comma. What this is going to do is it's going to keep the ratio under 2 and under and greater than 0.5. So let me decompile. Oh, let me hide that print for distance. We don't need that. Here we go one last time. Okay, so the ratio, it's not going to get smaller than 0.5. And it's not going to get, let me do this with the, it's not going to get bigger than 2. Okay, so that's the whole point of that. This keeps the ratio between 0.5 and 2. Okay, so now what we want to do, we've got our touches, we can see that this thing is, we're shrinking and increasing the size of these circles that are being drawn everywhere our fingers are touching the screen. But what we want to do is actually scale this background image. So let's multiply this by ratio. So we're affecting how big along the x-axis. And we'll do the same on the y-axis. And let's hide this. Oop, that's comments in C and C++. Okay, so if we do this now, and I touch the screen and put my fingers together, and we've got pinch zoom. Awesome. Okay, I just wanted to add one more thing. So something that I forgot to do is all of this reset code right here. We also need to do this when we are switching from 2 fingers to 1 finger. That's the last thing that needs to happen. I just forgot to put that in earlier. Yeah, that does go there. All right, that's it. Just a quick little thing of code that's missing. Now, something to think about is the fact that you've got this duplicated code. So that means that there is a potential for optimization within this logic here. Yeah. Also, there's also potential for this may not need to be a separate function. Same for the gather touches. There are ways of setting that up so it's that way. Okay, cool. All right, so now there's a couple things that we can do to make this more interesting. Something that we could do is we could make it so that it zooms in wherever our fingers actually touch the screen. So that way, you know, if we touched, let me turn this back on right here so you can see where I'm actually touching the screen. If we were to touch right here and zoom in there or pinch zoom right there, it's gonna zoom in on that. We could try to tile this background image. So that way we can kind of, you know, scroll it back and forth and zoom in. You know, there's a couple different things that are pretty they're not like the most difficult things to implement, but they are going to take a little bit of thought. So, yeah. So this is, you know, just kind of get you introduced into thinking about how to handle setting up, being able to pinch zoom on graphics. My goal is just to, you know, introduce some of these topics because I like teaching, and also because more people need to learn how to code because it's fun to do, it's easy to do, and it's just a really good skill to have. All right, so with that said, I hope you dug this, and yeah, look for more of these type tutorials coming in the future.